And then at 4:30 a.m., after years of restoration, the journey began.
Did you have to take the engine apart as well, or was it all still disassembled? That's the beauty of these old things. You can understand and grasp everything. If you have a bit of expertise, it all works.
It just has to be dealt with intensively.
Wow, your leather bags are impressive. You can really see that they are very, very, very old. They are all still the originals.
But this here was really intended as a military machine.
Yes, hello friends, today we have an extremely cool episode again. Helge has arrived here with his heavy military machine, and we want to see if we can get some more additional detailed information from him about it. The BMW R75 was considered a secret weapon in the Second World War and was still in use in the last years. And here are a few more photos from the operational period of this motorcycle during the Second World War. Hitler ordered the two leading motorcycle manufacturers, Zündapp and BMW, to design a heavy sidecar machine for the most difficult conditions in the field during the Second World War. After 2 years of development, BMW introduced the BMW R75, which came equipped with off-road and road gearing, sidecar drive, and hydraulic brakes. Yes, look, this is the companion book that was available for this heavy military machine. Right on. One of the first pages, there is such a beautiful performance sketch. Berlin, June 27th, 1941. Original Command of the Army. Army Office, Department Group for Development and Testing. On behalf of Holzhauer. Here is the structure of the motorcycle. The individual components and functions. All nicely labeled and numbered. The engine. And here you can see it quite well on this R engine. They used bevel gears and control wheels, unlike the R, which still had a chain, and that was of course a huge advantage here. They last forever, of course. And look, you could change the engine on this motorcycle so brilliantly. The frame of the A is assembled from many small pipe connections and additional components, and you can easily unscrew it here, fold it down, and then simply lift the engine out. So, actually, perfectly built. Yes, here is another look at the drive shaft. Also, quite graceful. Gear, cascades inside. Incredible technology. That excites. Here is the quick disassembly of the rear wheel. You could easily flip up the fender, which, by the way, was also the case with many motorcycles built at that time, as they simply had a hinge at the back of the fender, allowing you to quickly pull the wheel out with just a few hand movements. Here is another top view. So when you are sitting on the motorcycle, from above you can see the shift linkage and the shift gate here, and it indicates off-road, and then you have the gear shift with 4 gears, neutral, and a reverse gear. Yes, the wiring diagram is very basic, just 4 or 5 wires. Yes, and this is how the whole motorcycle works. Here we have this control box, a small one again, with all the connections right here. The fuse box included, and the distribution box. And here is the box, installed on the motorcycle. So 2 go back, 3 go forward, and 4 go down. 2 brake light switches and 2 for the battery. With that, the entire motorcycle was electrically fit.
So friends, today we have an exclusive person and an exclusive machine. Helgo is here and has brought us a beautiful motorcycle. I know the machine. You know it inside and out, right? Of course. Helgo, please tell us a bit about the motorcycle. How does one get such a cool machine?
Well, it all didn't start right away with such a sidecar, at least not with one from West Germany, or produced in West Germany, but of course also with one from the Russians. And that's where I gained my experiences, and then said, at some point, I have to bring the great-grandfather or father of the whole story to land. And then I made an effort and bought such a part that had been taken apart in boxes and crates during those years. Really, yes. So it was a real barn find or what? Unfortunately, it was no longer a barn find, but the good man had brought it from Poland and wanted to assemble it himself. But he couldn't get around to it and wanted to pass it on to his son. He wasn't really interested, so I bought it. And then I spent 5 years restoring it. And then the journey began.
And then it is restored like that. It's not so easy to restore something like this.
I wanted to say that we have traveled the world here, through the world. So we have indeed been to Germany, right?
We have here the R from the Second World War, but what is its year of manufacture?
You said year of manufacture 43.
Year of manufacture 43. And this is also the version that is not seen as often. So this one with the helmet on it, the Sahara machine, is seen more frequently. But this one has this, we also have this model, it has this toolbox on top.
And that has a disadvantage, but also a huge advantage. The disadvantage is that you can't submerge it up to here, because then water or dirt would flow into the air filter. If you have it up here, of course, you don't have that issue.
Doesn't happen too often anymore, does it?
But the big advantage is that the machine runs quietly. When you ride around with such a helmet air filter, the quieter the tank gets, the less gasoline is in the tank, the louder the motorcycle becomes. And the ears really do fall off, you know. I know people who have one of those things, and they stuff foam and all sorts of things in, but it's still always loud, and you can hear exactly the intake noises, right, practically in front of your face, right in front of the ears, yes.
So, really solid German technology. I believe Hitler commissioned 2 such motorcycles from 2 companies for the Wehrmacht, one from Zündap and the other from BMW. Yes, the one from BMW was the R, and the one from Zündap was the KS 750. Both have been similar, in terms of performance as well. How much? 25 horsepower or 28 horsepower?
The reason is that the fuel was synthetically produced, and therefore the compression had to be lowered significantly, because they only achieved 74 octane to reach the clock fluid, which is also why the performance is lean. Originally the engine had, I can tell you exactly, over 30 horsepower.
And did you have to take the engine apart as well, or was it all still intact?
There was indeed an engine that was supposedly restored, but that wasn't the case. Nothing was new inside. It was just beautifully glued together, all with sealant. And that's why everything had to be completely redone from scratch.
And the transmission, well, with the R, this reverse gear situation is always a bit of a challenge. I think with the Zündap, it's even a bit worse with this chain drive. 2001.
Here we have the A transmission once again, also very nicely illustrated in this manual. Yes, you can see here the individual gears, the angled teeth of the wheels, and here at the front we have the reverse gear, which is also nicely illustrated in the cross section.
And then you can really enjoy riding it, definitely, indeed. Photo 100. I've driven about kilometer with this gearbox now, really. Yes, you got it right. I had the gearbox repaired, which lasted 1900 kilometers, and then it was really completely shot with the gearbox that I installed myself. I've driven the rest. What is the reason for that? Did you use the old gears, or are there good new ones? It has to be assembled properly, and it works well. You can tell that it doesn't shift as smoothly anymore. It needs to be taken apart at some point. But as long as it works, even if it hesitates a bit, it stays together. I mean, You're quite sporty with it if you've already driven so many kilometers. Where have you been? Just crossing Germany so far? That can happen quickly. Just 6 weeks ago, we drove to Thuringia, to Schleiz, because my son was doing an internship there. Yes, and back again. While my son was working there, my wife and I took some nice round trips. My wife always comes along. Not always, but it's cool when it's not camping, but a holiday apartment. Then you can lure her in. That was also about 2,000 kilometers. Is it a German machine, or does it originally come from Poland? It originally comes from Poland. It was left there, and the person who had it before was into model building, specifically for foundry models. Whenever he went to Poland to pick up some things for his business, he would always bring back a few parts. That's how it ended up in these boxes. Exactly, and it stayed there until he... How long did it take you? 4 years? Yes, it took about 4 years. Was it already a complete set? Or did you assemble it? The set was there. That was a blessing. Everything was there in terms of the basic components. The only thing is, quite a few parts were missing, like the fenders, lighting, and a lot of small parts. I can't remember everything. And back then, 30 years ago, you didn't have as much available. Today you can get almost everything as replicas, but 30 years ago, it was still quite sparse. 30 years ago, it was indeed leaner, but there were still quite a few original parts available, including some technology. And there were already gears and stuff like that, and pistons and all that kind of thing and stuff.
Such things existed, yes.
So that was not a reproduction. Some gears were, of course, but valves and pistons were all in ongoing production. No, the pistons are from Opel. No, I don't know about the valves right now, but they were also from some ongoing productions.
Are you a motor mechanic or a regular locksmith? You can, well, as a regular locksmith, you can understand the technology. That's the beauty of these old things. You can trace and comprehend everything. If you have a bit of know-how, it all works.
You just have to engage intensively with it, and then it works. And you must not forget that when you really drive, it is also maintenance intensive. Because if you tell someone today that when they start the engine, after 200 or 300 kilometers, we check the oil and take a look. Or after 5,000 kilometers, we need to take apart the ignition because the bearings are then dry. The bearings need to be lubricated. Or with the meager oil supply here in the differential, 300 ml. Yes, even if it sometimes went backwards, you know. But that was quite normal at that time. 2,000 kilometer.
And
completely normal. The translator was involved. Right.
do you know how many of these R models were built? How many units?
So roughly speaking, that's how many were built. You can't really say exactly how many there were, because after the war, some were still assembled in Eisenach. So numbers for Russia, to put it in German. And they keep appearing again and again.
Machines were used properly again.
Exactly. Then there was also the attempt in the GDR, where a new version of the AW0700 was tried to be built.
Exactly. I think there was 1 or 2 prototypes of that. It looks quite similar if you look at it in terms of the engine and so on.
This is a Boxer engine, and they have a V engine. At first glance, I don't know how much wire there is. Not much support, but if you look closely and from underneath, you can see that it is indeed a V engine. They quickly realized, of course, that there are so many parts for this purpose. Total nonsense.
It should all be as simple as possible in the East and not so complicated, elaborate and expensive. Such a motorcycle was supposed to be for the common people. I wanted to know again about the wheels. Is it really true that you could swap them between the Zundap and the BMW? Or even with Usand, but unfortunately only in theory? Yes, so that didn't work out.
Often it is indeed the case that it doesn't actually fit, because they had different suppliers or they manufactured it themselves. But according to different tolerances, And that's why sometimes it really is the case that you have the same gear in your hand and want to install it, but it doesn't fit. Because either a bushing doesn't fit on it or the gear itself doesn't match in circumference. And that has to do with the fact that everyone has their own production and everyone has their own tolerances built in. Therefore, sometimes not fundamentally, but sometimes the parts actually do not fit.
Now let's go into a bit more detail about your vehicle. Here on the side you have two nice levers. This is the manual gear lever. Are you sure? Yes, it even says off-road and road on it. Anyone who is not familiar with the vehicle can read this themselves and understand how it works. So, that means you have the lever here for the gear shifting, and here you have the off-road gears. Yes, 2001, and on the other one it says first, second, third gear. Exactly.
It has to be logical. So, of course, one must have an additional lever somewhere for the terrain reduction. But the other requirement back then was foot shifting and manual shifting. For whatever reason, I have no idea, but it is also quite practical because you can always see immediately which gear you are in. That is certainly an advantage. And you need 2001 anyway, plus the additional lever for the reverse gear. That's why it's more or less necessary anyway.
Then you press this little button in here.
That's right.
And here you have locks for the differential. It goes through.
There were several versions of it. The first version could simply be engaged, and it often happened that while driving, one would accidentally hit it with their knee, unintentionally engaging the lock. And then when turning, the vehicle would go straight ahead instead.
You can't do that either.
Have you tried it before?
You can't do that. I've done that with mine before too. You just drive straight ahead. It's just crazy. Just push yours straight.
That's why it was changed so that it can no longer be engaged in that way. You have to pull it outwards to really engage the lock.
The exhaust and everything else still looks really original.
The heat shield is original, but the exhaust behind it is no longer.
It looks good. I always find it nice when it has a few little dents. Yes, even your leather bags. You can see that they are really, really, really old, that they are all still the originals.
Both are old, and here is a metal pack bag attached. There was also a leather pack bag attached. I still have that at home.
They were also Wehrmacht here.
But that's also a replica. You can always see it, especially when you mix things up, like the modern hinges that are simply screwed onto the wood again. Yes, that will come later. But here lies the problem with the leather saddlebag, that you can quickly hit it with your heel, and that's why the leather saddlebag already has a hole here.
When you mean kicking. Yes, that's the eternal wear. And eventually, there's a hole. Then you have something like a quick 1,000 closures on it.
It has several versions. This is an early version which has a safety button here.
Exactly, it can't just pop open or be taken out in a flash. Insane. Yes, very nice.
This is the later version. Here they have added some fancier dimensions on top. Yes, with a stamping lever and such.
You still have just one license plate that is original.
Logical?
And that was still with a box. Incredible. Very nice. And up here is the switch. Right.
Exactly, yes. The short circuit switch, where you turn everything off in 2001, because there is no sun key.
Yes. And the emblems are even original. I just saw that. Wow. That's wonderful. Because these enameled emblems at BMW back then, the effort that went into making such an emblem was significant. I also saw it here on the sidecar, enameled and made of brass, or it looks like copper, which were the first ones from the war, right?
Still beautifully enameled or partially painted. And as the war progressed and the material shortages grew, in the end, it was only steel sheet metal. There was nothing enameled anymore. It was simply screwed on and painted over.
And today we have plastic everywhere. You can see how proud they are of their motorcycle now, when they wouldn't have thought of it earlier in life. Such crap on it. And what insignia do you have here at the front? Do you know that?
What is this? Tank Hunter badge. RIFE stands for the third company.
Oh, and was it like that too?
Or do you not care about the appearance at all? But in such a historical association, we represent a tank hunter unit. And that's why it is included.
then you are a group that also maintains these things and sometimes goes out together to meet up with others.
Anyone can take a look. This is the Tank Hunter 228, as the association calls itself. And it's not a registered association, but rather a loose connection of people who, on one hand, own such vehicles, and on the other hand, collect various items. And then you just find yourselves coming together like that. And in Germany, it's not really trendy to hold such events on a large scale. But for example, in Denmark and Belgium.
Yes, but that's another matter. One doesn't appreciate the time itself. One simply appreciates the technology, and that is absolutely worth preserving.
And with them, it's always about the time and the representation, as you already said. And then they will celebrate the liberation in some place, as far as I'm concerned, for the Germans. So how is one supposed to celebrate such a liberation when there are only American soldiers around? This doesn't look good. It's also not fun in the sea, because there are always two sides to the story with the Indians and cowboys. Yes, everything is set up like this here. It's just as silly. And that's why it's always about presenting it realistically and, above all, showing the younger people what it looked like.
That's how it is with us too.
So there are very, very large events here in Oberlohn at the museum. Once in spring, there are only vehicles to look at, and they drive around in a circle where you can also take a ride. And once in autumn, there is a combination of vehicles and corresponding soldiers, along with representations, And it is really being received extremely well there. So the event is basically sold out.
So if you don't reserve a ticket in advance and then show up, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people, but tens of thousands of people come, and the people all see each other again thanks to this simple technique that you can understand and repair with healthy individuals. And it's not, as I said, about war. It's simply about being fascinated by this technology that was put together back then with the simplest means. Helgo, where did you start from, and where are you headed?
So I set off from Bremen. Then I came across the Elbe near Dönitz. And then I was at the campsite in Wittenberg for the first time. Then I continued driving past Magdeburg to a place whose name I have already forgotten, a small campsite.
So you never really plan a tour beforehand, but rather ride freely wherever you feel like, just following your instincts, or wherever the sun shines, where it is bright? Now, a little zilly in the bike shop, and where are you heading next?
So now we continue in the Harz region, specifically to the other side, to Badenhausen. There is a nice little vehicle meeting, usually around 20 to 30 vehicles from that era, and right in the forest, a hike, and it is truly wonderful.
Yes, here is also the little label that used to provide a quick overview. Whoever owned the motorcycle would immediately know how to maintain it in 2021, and where the lubrication points are, and so on.
Extremely intensively trained. The people who had to ride such things obviously experienced it differently. They were allowed to. So for them, it was already a highlight when they were suddenly allowed to get on such a motorcycle and ride something like that. But there was, of course, a certain prerequisite. On one hand, there was the driving skill, and on the other hand, the maintenance, because logically, an engine should not be disassembled, but it had to be checked daily for oil levels, and the handles had to be greased, and all those things. And that's why these are, of course, small memories that are attached. But generally, they knew best themselves anyway, because as mentioned, they were really drilled until they could do it perfectly, so that everything worked flawlessly. And they knew their motorcycle inside and out, because back then, their lives truly depended on it.
They wanted to see it that way, that in the war with something like that, you can see it in the old pictures. If you have a few Wehrmacht photos where there are motorcycles, yes, it was quite simple. The motorcycle had to be like a good friend, like a comrade. You relied on it when something happened. You had to be able to trust it when it came to life and death. Yes, and that's how they behaved.
I would say that if you were out as a Kratmelder and broke down somewhere, it was already bad enough. But this was really intended as a combat vehicle. There wasn't even a machine gun mounted on the front.
We also have the version...
It was indeed the case, especially in the early years of the war, that they were supposed to drive towards the enemy. Then the second vehicle, the 2001, was to get as close as possible, make a turn, and while making that turn, the man in the sidecar was supposed to jump out with the machine gun, and the second man in the back, the second shooter, was also supposed to do the same. Then the driver was to bring the vehicle to safety and also engage in the fight. They naturally let that go very quickly because you can imagine how far one could get when driving such a vehicle directly into the enemy's line.
But it is stated in this documentation, this old manual, that it is clearly written there at the back on the last pages, how to behave with the motorcycle at the front and so on. It is clearly written there with drawings and so on.
And you really get a sense of fear when you think about what they had to endure back then, what they went through during those times. It's just incredible.
A modest time, and unfortunately, it hasn't helped at all because if we get it back in Europe, that's what I always say.
80 years later, we are unable to convey a German position here. No, we are taking sides and cutting the friendship bond with the Russians for eternity. It is so painful to witness.
Yes, and never has a tank or any war vehicle created peace anywhere. And I always say ultimately motorcycles are not either. Because I simply find these motorcycles great, and you do too. Otherwise you wouldn't be riding such a machine.
And ultimately the motorcycles are not to blame, but always the people. And that is no different now.
And that's why I say, we are both for peace, right? Yes, definitely. And I'm glad that you presented your motorcycle here with us. And I wish you a lot of fun with it. And take good care of it. All right, take care.
So Helgo is setting off to the Harz. Just listen to how beautifully the machine really starts. Incredible. GA75 from World War II. Here in wonderfully preserved condition. Take care. Simply honest.